Well, good morning and welcome again to our online Bible study. Of course, our theme has been for a good while now, Your Kingdom Come. Your will, your way, every day. That should be our mission and our goal every day is to pray that prayer. Your will, your way. So, your kingdom come. That's what he taught us to pray, right? Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So be it, Lord. Let it be. Now, today our subtitle is Love Never Fails. And we're taking our text from the Gospel of John, John chapter 13, verse 1. Now, before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his time had come, that he would depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So Jesus, knowing that his time had come, that he was going to depart from this world and go back to the Father. It was for him a very sobering time because he knew to get from here to there that it would require a lot from him. It would require a lot of suffering. He would have to go through humiliation, pain, suffering, grieving, and just also feeling the loss of his father because he would be separated from God as he hung on the cross, and he was taking upon himself our sin. He who knew no sin became sin that we might receive the forgiveness of sins. So that part of the story was the hardest part that he would have to endure. But again, this is the setting is that this is, let's go back, it's the feast of the Passover. And the disciples and Jesus were celebrating the Passover feast, the Passover meal. And Jesus knew that he was just hours away from the crucifixion. Although, the disciples they weren't aware of this. But he knew that this was it. So, how do you say goodbye? Especially a final goodbye before leaving this world to enter into the next. Just a couple of days ago, I was at the bedside of a man who was in that process of leaving this world and entering into the next. And of course, in his particular case, he was in a lot of pain, so they were giving him morphine, and so he was not responsive. He was not speaking. He was not talking. He was not able to. So in that case, how do you tell people goodbye? When you know it's that final goodbye, that you'll never see these people again in this world. What do you say? What are the emotions that turn inside of you? What message do you want to convey to those who are left behind? Sometimes those messages are not spoken, but they are unspoken. So simply put, our text is saying that Jesus and his disciples were gathered to celebrate their last Passover meal together, commonly referred to as the Last Supper. But the disciples, they didn't know, or they didn't have a clue, or nor did they know the significance of this hour. Maybe they knew something was up, but they really were clueless. They didn't know. They didn't understand the significance. You know, there's sometimes in hindsight, we look back and we said, oh, I wish I'd said or done something differently if I'd only known. If they had only known what was going to happen in the next few hours, would they have changed what they said or what they did? It just makes you wonder. And sometimes you live in a state of regret because you said, oh, I just wish I had just said something. I just wish that I had told that person I loved them, or I just wish that somehow I could have comforted them, or, you know, on and on and on it can go. I wish I'd done things differently so that they wouldn't be going through what they're going through. Again, the regret or just the lack of discernment, not being able to see what was going on. Sometimes you just have a feeling that something is happening, but you just can't put your finger on it. You don't understand. But Jesus, on the other hand, he knew that this was it. He knew that this was their last night together before his crucifixion the next day. He knew that very soon he would depart from this world to the Father. So what was the unspoken message that Jesus delivered to his disciples? Well, this is the way that the beloved disciple John summed it up. In verse 1, he said, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. He loved them to the end. Now, loving doesn't mean, like it says here, it doesn't mean that Jesus looked upon his disciples with rose-colored glasses. He knew their weaknesses, and he also knew their strengths. He also knew, prophetically, he knew that there were those at the table who would betray him and deny him, that would be coming within the next few hours. That there were members of those sitting in that circle as they gathered together in that Last Supper. There were those that were there that were going to betray him and deny him. And they would all flee when he was needing them. John 13:21 says, when Jesus had said this, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, very verily, I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. Now we know in hindsight that it was Judas Iscariot who was the treasurer of the group. When Jesus said, one of you will betray me, everybody was saying, well, is it me? Is it me? You know, they were hoping that they would not do that to Jesus. And even Judas Iscariot said that. And Jesus said, yes, it's you. What you're going to do quickly. And he went out into the night, and Satan entered into him. He made that decision. He had been thinking about it for a good while now. But that was the point of decision where he made that fatal decision to betray Jesus. And of course, he's referred to as the son of perdition. He went out and he did this. And of course, he's in hell today because he made that choice. He allowed Satan to enter into him. But there was more. Verses 37 through 38, Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I'll lay down my life for you. Because Jesus was telling them, of course, about what was going to happen and how he would be arrested and brought to trial. But Jesus said, I'll lay down my life for you. But Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. Think about that. Denied Jesus 3 times. Peter was the leader of the group. Peter was a natural leader, and he is going to deny the Lord 3 times that he even knew him. And he was denying him before servant girls. It wasn't before those in power or position. He was denying them with those that were in the courtyard. These were servants that were out there. And he was denying. They kept saying, well, you're one of his disciples. He says, no, I'm not. And again, fear had crept into his heart. And he began not denying the Lord 3 times. But that wasn't the only time throughout the 3.5 years that Jesus ministered while he was here on this earth. There were times that Jesus experienced a lot of emotions like frustration, anger, irritation, vexation, grief, and exasperation with them because of their hardness of heart and their dullness of comprehension or understanding of the nature and the character of God, or of their inability to identify or to see him for who he really was. You know, at one time, he even asked them point blank, who do you say that I am? He did first ask, who do people say that I am? But then he point blank asked them, who do you say that I am? Now at that point, Peter responded very inspiringly, because he said, you're the Christ, you're the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, this didn't come from men, this was revealed to you from God. But there were still those, even though they had faith, there was still doubt lingering in their heart. It's possible to have faith and unbelief at the same time. And we don't understand that. Sometimes people say, well, you just don't have enough faith. No. What you need is less unbelief. You need to get rid of the unbelief. You've got enough faith. It only takes faith as small as a mustard seed. That's all it takes as far as on the equation for faith. But you need 0 unbelief on the other side of the equation. But if you've got a mixture, well, I believe, but, I'm not sure. If you're like on a seesaw, if you're teetering back and forth, and one side is up and one side is down, or if you're at a level plane and there's the same amount of faith on one side and the same amount of unbelief on the other, then you can't get the breakthrough. Faith has to, like on the seesaw, when you go up in the air, faith has to go up. Unbelief has to go down. But anyway, just what Jesus was trying to say to his disciples, trying to get across to them, they just weren't getting it. Even with all the miracles, the healings, the raising people from the dead, the feeding of the thousands, the multitudes of people, even in those circumstances, they still weren't getting it. When they would cross the Sea of Galilee and a storm would come up, and the water and the waves were beating upon the ship, and they thought that they were going to die, and they go and wake Jesus up, and they say, Lord, don't you care that we are perishing? And Jesus was saying, look, have you not been with me long enough that you can't do something about this storm yourself? Have you not learned from me? It's very frustrating. I've tried to teach for decades now, and I experienced a small amount, I guess, of what Jesus was experiencing with the disciples. the frustration, the anger, the irritation, the vexation, the grief, the exasperation, he was thinking to himself, how long is it going to take for these guys to get it? You know, you try to teach, you try to help people, you try to show people, you try to demonstrate for people the power of God and what God can do, that there's nothing impossible with God. But still, there were moments when the disciples just did not flat out get it. Now here's some examples to illustrate that point. In Mark chapter 3, verse 5, and Jesus looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. It was on the Sabbath day. All they were concerned about was the Sabbath day. That you're not supposed to do this on the Sabbath day. But it said that Jesus was angry because God, you know, it's like an ox that's caught, it's fallen into a ditch or into a pit. You'd get it out. You'd have compassion. You would help that animal, that helpless animal, get out of the pit. But you won't heal a person on the Sabbath? You won't have compassion? So Jesus was frustrated and angry and grieved at their hardness of heart, of their lack of compassion for people's needs. And then in Mark chapter 7, verse 34, and looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be open. Jesus was again bringing healing to a person, but it said he was sighing. Again, the frustration inside of him. Can you not get it? That this is God's will for people to be set free from their sicknesses, their afflictions, their demonic oppressions and possessions. Mark 8, chapter 12, and he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. You know, they were saying, give us a sign and we'll believe you. How many signs does it take? Again, sighing deeply in his spirit. John chapter 11. Now this one really hits home because this is someone that he dearly loved. John chapter 11, 38. Then when Mary was come where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother had not died. Ooh, wow. That's like piercing someone in the heart. It's your fault that my brother is dead. You didn't care. You didn't do something about this. What if somebody came to you and said, if you had been here, things would have been different. It wouldn't have happened. That puts a lot on you. And when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Now, I think the translator was trying to soften what actually was going on here, because in the Greek language, the word that's translated groaned in the Greek means snorted with anger or indignation. He was just angry. Again, how long will it take for people to get it? I am the resurrection and the life. There's nothing impossible with God. Why can't you believe that? Why can't you accept that? Instead of coming to me and blaming me for your circumstances. knowing that there's nothing impossible with God. And don't think that it's me doing it. But I'm here to bring salvation. I'm here to bring deliverance. And then later in verse 38, Jesus therefore, this is when they got to the tomb of Lazarus. Jesus therefore again, groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Again, the word groaning in himself, that's the same Greek word, which means he snorted with anger and indignation. He was so upset. He was so frustrated, so angry. What do I have to do to get these people to believe? What do I have to demonstrate? What miracle do I have to perform before these people will get it? Can you see the frustration of Jesus? And then in Matthew chapter 17, verse 17, Jesus and Peter, James, and John had gone up on the Mount of Transfiguration. And Jesus had been transformed before their very eyes. And he began to be manifest the glory of God upon himself, who he really was. They saw him in all of his glory. And Elijah and Moses appeared to them. Well, they came back down the mountain, and the disciples that were left down below, a man had come to them with the son that what we would call was having convulsions. And he wanted the disciples to do something for his boy, and they couldn't. And Jesus comes down, and the man goes up to Jesus and said, I brought my son to your disciples and they couldn't do anything. But if you can do anything, if you can do anything, if you can do anything. That's what the Father said to Jesus, the Father of this Son. If you can do anything. How frustrating again would Jesus be if, that's a slap in his face, really. It's an insult. If you can do anything. Well, this man could see that his disciples were not able to do anything. So he was losing hope. He was losing the battle of faith here. And Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted or distorted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring them here to me. The disciples, they didn't do what Jesus had taught them to do. And Jesus is saying, time's running out. How long am I going to have to be with you? How long will it take before you get it? So again, the insult that he was receiving, if you can do anything. If you can do anything. And Jesus turns it around and says, if you can believe. And the man says, I do believe. Help my unbelief. There again, that is the answer. That we don't need more faith. We need no unbelief. We need to get rid of the unbelief or the doubt in our lives. That's what we need to focus on. Not trying, I got to build my faith. Faith only takes a small amount, like a mustard seed. What you need is to get rid of the unbelief and the doubt. So, if you were in Jesus' shoes, do you think that you would have had second thoughts about the people that he chose to be his disciples? Would you trust these men to carry out your mission? Especially when you had sacrificed your blood, sweat, and tears, yes, everything, even your own life. Are you going to trust it into their hands? Could you feel secure of their capability to do this divine assignment without your help and your physical presence? Especially with their track record. For example, they tucked tail and ran when he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. They cowered behind closed doors for fear of the Jews during and after his crucifixion. They didn't stand up for him at his trial or at the cross. Where were they when Jesus was brought to trial before Pilate? Were they in that crowd? Where were they when Jesus was hanging on the cross? Well, John was there with Jesus' mother, but other than that, where were the others? And for Pete's sake, kind of a pun, for Pete's sake, they went fishing even after they knew about his resurrection because they didn't know what else to do. They were floundering around. They had no direction, they didn't know what they were supposed to do or where they were supposed to go. So Peter says, I'm going fishing. I don't know about the rest of you. Fishing was the only thing he knew about that he had been spending most of his life doing before he met Jesus. Yet despite it all, John says, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. This was their Last Supper together. And he washed their feet. And he shared with him his heart. He shared with them hope. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come unto you and receive you. In my Father's house are many mansions. Many mansions. He loved them. Frustrated with them. Angry with them. A lot of times exasperated. Snorting with anger. I mean, just groaning in his spirit because of their lack of unbelief. Because of their lack of faith. And because of their unbelief. But warts and all, faults and flaws, Jesus had invested his life into them. For 3.5 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, basically, he had invested his very life into them. And I guess what Jesus was wondering as they were sitting around the table, was it worth it? Was it worth it to know that I've got a betrayer in my midst? I've got another one that's one of the leaders of our group who's going to deny me, that he even knows me. Is it going to be worth it? Well, if that was the end of the story, I guess we would have question marks. And we would say, I don't know. I don't know whether it's worth it or not. All the grief, the sorrow, the pain, the suffering, the abuse, physically, mentally. Was it worth it? Well, again, if that were the end of the story, you would wonder. If you didn't know the rest of the story, you'd say, I don't know. But we have to keep reading, and we get to the book of Acts. And decades later, after his resurrection, we have the Apostle Paul, who is traveling throughout the world, sharing the good news. And he is going to different places, and he's facing persecution. And they were trying to run him out of town in this situation, and those that were with him. But when they couldn't find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, now listen to this, these men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. Yes, these men, because of Jesus, caused a revolution, caused a transformation in the lives of people that spread throughout the world. Even thousands of years later, we are here because of their sacrifice. Because all of the disciples, except, of course, Judas, all of them died martyr's death, except for John. But he was severely persecuted. He was boiled in oil, and that didn't kill him. And so they banned him and banished him to the Isle of Patmos as an old man. He was in exile as a prisoner. But that didn't stop him either. He wrote the book of Revelation while he was there. These men, here was Paul, who before had been called Saul, who was the greatest persecutor of the church. But on the road to Damascus, he had had an encounter with Jesus Christ that transformed his life. And he and those with him were turning the world upside down. Yeah, was it worth it? Man, when you think about what Jesus went through, what's the payback? What's the return on the investment that he made in these people's lives? Well, I wouldn't be here if that had not happened. And I don't think neither would you. So, having loved his own that were in the world, he loved them to the end. Love never fails. Love never fails. Praise God. Hallelujah.